case whilst investigations went ahead. He came back with a final written warning, meaning one more incident and he was sacked. All his pension, benefits, gone. 2 days after he came back, me and my colleague got asked to come into a meeting regarding this employee. Got in the meeting. Senior HR and the boss of the company are sat inside. They lay out new allegations. So we have had a report that when working in a property, you went into the house when there was only a 14-year-old girl and then proceeded to talk to her about sex, condoms and other obscene matters we won't mention. So we're just like whoa wait, what the heck, we need to talk to our colleague and find out what's happened here and give him advice. Nope. Before we even had a chance to do that, the guy spoke up and went, yeah I did. Nothing wrong with that. She's 14. She knows how to use a condom. She's from the area. That's all they know how to do. They have sex and get pregnant by 16. So I'm just talking to her about what she knows. Dude was in his late 50s, he should know better. Both me and my colleague just stunned like why the frick did he just say that? Anyway, he got suspended and asked us to defend him because he says he did nothing wrong. We got the case file and evidence through. Realized that there was actually frick all we could do. He dug his grave. Dug it a day after he returned to work. He lost everything. His house, pension, everything. No one would employ him as he was deemed too risky to take on, knowing they could have a potential sex scandal should he do it again. I'm a paralegal. Local guy in his 20s decides to go rob his dealer. He got the wrong apartment. When the college girl opened the door, he shot her in the face and fled. She lay there for hours just out of reach of her cell phone and listened to it ring while her mom called. She lived. A neighbor found her. Now she's paralyzed from the neck down and her face is very deformed. This is a small town. During the trial, the jury was shown just how strung out on drugs he was and how he even bragged to a few friends that he shot someone. That's pretty dang hard to defend. He got 40-something years. The girl that drove him to and from the apartment was also given jail time. That poor freaking woman. I can't help but think about the fact that she has to live with knowing that her life has been completely destroyed because of something that she had nothing at all to do with. I would be bitter as all heck. It's like a 100-way tie for first place. Spoiler alert, they had the drugs on them. Less frequently, it was a gun. And yeah, let's just say the I have a permit offense for the latter was not something we had to worry about round those parts. You'd be surprised how quickly cases become at least theoretically defensible as soon as you establish any distance whatsoever between the client and the contraband. Though, in fact, I'd say there's a systematic bias in juries and lots of inconsistency in the relevant case law about how difficult it is, and or ought to be, to prove possession beyond a reasonable doubt. It is, of course, in favor of the prosecution. Guy wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. Guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he had been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he called the city to have them get rid of the mice, but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this, and he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest and the towed garbage truck. An independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day, he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in her residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues with the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. Office is boarded up for non-payment of rent. His house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he paid his insurance up front and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and absolutely no regard for the structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shoddy and his file management so poor that we had basically nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intention of returning for trial, and we'd probably never be paid. We once had a client skip bail and run. I looked him up on FB and he had posted a photo of the bond paperwork and a bunch of $20 bills. The post reads something like, "Man, frick the law and my bondsman. Can't nobody tell me crap. Blah blah. Typical hood crap. We live in BFE, Texas. Dude is not a gangster." Anyways, he didn't realize that the only reason we bonded him was because we were going to represent him. Withdrew on the bond in the case. In the motion to withdraw we quoted his FB post and attached a copy of it as Exhibit A when we filed it. Not a lawyer, but I was a witness to an assault a few years back. Had to get up in the box and be questioned. Terrifying. Anyway, it was on a night out, hanging around outside a club. A female friend of mine took exception to some dude grabbing her butt. Both start slinging insults at each other until the guy decides to sling his fist at her face instead. Right in the presence of 3 police officers, who witnessed the whole thing and arrested him immediately. The guy for some reason denied it all, despite being caught literally red-handed by the popo, and it had to be resolved in court. How would you even argue on his behalf? I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. Plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. Plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities, and she returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress, but he did not do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from. Not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail. But she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy, so he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare. The jail. Maybe. Just a sad case that the hospital won handily. The real loser is that poor kid colon. I represent condo and homeowners associations. One of my condo association clients wanted to evict some tenants because they were fat. I am not even joking. Now, the law does, in some cases, allow the association to evict non-owner tenants. This is very fact specific. However, I spent a long time trying to elicit from my client exactly what these tenants were doing that warranted eviction. Client: well, they're just disgusting people. They are fat. Penge 1028. Exasperated. You can't evict someone because they're fat. We did not end up filing suit. I got sued for $50,000 by a man who claimed his arm was broken when he sideswiped my car at 2 AM. We both got a DUI, and he was also cited for going the wrong way on the freeway. My attorney determined that the guy had been to the doctor the day before the accident and had received treatments to his broken arm. He was charged with filing a false police report and some other charges. Ended up doing 90 days in county lockup. I paid my fine, did the required procedure to get my license back, and learned my lesson. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but my dad was. My dad was a patent and trademark attorney about 10 years ago and worked for a pharmaceutical company. The owner of the company adopted the slogan "Just do it," not knowing that the trademark belonged to Nike. When the owner found out that the trademark belonged to one of the biggest companies in the world, rather than change the slogan and avoid a lawsuit, he calls up Nike and expresses how funny he thinks it is that they have the same slogan. My dad got them to settle the case and the catchphrase was later changed. I had a guy want to sue a popular chain restaurant because he had a heart attack there. Couldn't say what the restaurant did wrong, but it was clearly their fault since it happened in their restaurant. No thanks. Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your new bar restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he was not using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision. Something like you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now, the wackadoo received full payment but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There is a doctrine of law called material breach of contract, which, in a nutshell, means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late, when full payment had already been made, yes, it is a technical breach of the contract, but no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach, and certainly no court will let the wackadoo keep the license and the money. So we sued the wackadoo, who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. Wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. I'm not a lawyer, but my mother was in a lawsuit against her roommate and the roommate lost horribly. My mother, the nice and kind woman that she was, heard a family member's mother was going to be homeless. She was a bit crazy, which later turns to really crazy, and wasn't allowed to be on the premises of her daughter's apartment complex for legal reasons. She takes her and gives her the spare room. My mother worked as a hospice worker and stayed 4 nights a week at her client's home. She told her new roommate, who had nothing but a verbal consent to stay in her home, so no legal paperwork, no bills under her name, nothing but whatever random mail was sent to the roommate, was told that she could stay, live there rent and bill free as long as she cared for the pets and house while my mom worked. This lady had changed locks, done hard drugs, betrayed the house, stole items. The list goes on, but I'll cut it here to save a read. Well, my mother tells her she needs to leave and gives her over a month's notice to vacate her property. She did not, and after dozens of 911 calls and a legal notice to vacate after several trips to the local sheriff's office for help, as the roommate had squatters' rights, we managed to get her out and move on to court, as she had assaulted several of us between telling her to leave and her leaving. She represents herself and my mother. Myself and my then girlfriend with my mother's lawyer arrive. The lady was offered first speaking and she tried to lay out this massive defense. I have a copy of the lease, as well as several other documents making it illegal to remove me from this home. As well, I want to file charges against them for B&E, as well as verbal assault. The judge looks to us and we give them our statements, as well as all the videos we had recorded of us entering and company fronting the woman on this issue, and she was the only one screaming, cursing, and so on. As well, my mother and I, along with the home's actual owner, provide the actual lease. I signed on as a co-signer, though I did not live in the house, and all of which failed to have the roommate's signature on it. The charges on us were dropped almost immediately. She was charged with squatting, forging of legal documents, slander, and a few others I can't recall offhand. We were granted restraining orders against her. As well, she had to pay all the fines of the court and spend just over a year in jail. Sorry for a long one, but I hope someone enjoyed reading this. Divorce attorneys of Reddit. What was the most stupid reason 2 people wanted to divorce? Kid got 1 elephant ride too many. Mom and dad agreed before dad took daughter to circus that 1 elephant ride should be plenty. Mom later finds out that dad let daughter have 2, not 1, as agreed, but 2 elephant rides. As mom would describe it, he's doubling down again, trying to get her to hate me. I know it. Why the heck else is someone letting their kid ride an elephant halfway around the whole dang town? Everybody knows now. Not a divorce attorney, but there was a case in Kuwait where a woman wanted to divorce her husband because he eats hummus with a fork. A valid reason. She saw a picture of him contra dancing he'd posted on Facebook. She knew he went contra dancing. That part wasn't the surprise. In fact, I'm still confused about this one. Maybe she just wanted a divorce but didn't have the guts to actually admit she wanted one. So she just blamed some stupid thing he did instead of actually assuming the guilt and fault of initiating a divorce. Not an attorney, but my mom is a paralegal. There was one case that kept dragging along because they were fighting over the luggage. Once that was settled, they started arguing over a $25 plastic palm tree. That palm tree prompted the case to go into mediation, costing both of them around $1,000 each just for the mediation. Isn't that the point where both attorneys get together and they buy each other's client a tiny plastic palm tree as a thank you? My friend's parents divorced because his mother wanted a horse. His father argued that they can't keep a horse in a 6th floor apartment and don't have enough resources or money to rent a stable. Then she fricked her son's math teacher and became a C-kid. I feel sorry for everyone involved. I feel like the horse had very little to do with this story. I have a friend who used to be a security guard at a courthouse. He said one time he had to watch over a divorce proceeding between a 80-year-old man and his 40-year-old Vietnam wife. She said, in broken English, she wanted to divorce him because he couldn't satisfy her anymore. During the beginning of the case, she would yell mean things about this guy and the judge had to constantly tell her to be quiet. The old man never said a word. Eventually the judge said, "We will have to continue on a future date." She immediately said, "Then forget it," got up and walked out of the courtroom. There really should be no reason required for a divorce. Pay a fee, split up the assets and be on your way. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but a lawyer I know got a case because the husband didn't change his Facebook status to married quickly enough after the wedding. It was like 2 weeks. The judge laughed at the lady and made them get marriage counseling. Lawyer pocketed north of $1,000 for that. My ex's boyfriend, never married, mom told me that at his wedding to his now ex-wife he didn't introduce her immediately as his wife, so she flipped the heck out and started berating him in front of their guests. Marriage lasted less than 1 year. Don't get me wrong, he isn't a shat, but yikes. Maybe not be hateful to the person you just pledged to spend your life with. A much older woman, who had been married for a very long time, told me that one morning over breakfast, out of the blue, she had a burning desire to pick up her butter knife and stab her husband to death. She took that as a sign that maybe their relationship was toxic. Pretty solid reason for ending it. No, but my dad stated in court that he was divorcing my mom because she was always asking him to take out the trash or mow the lawn or calling him at work to ask him to pick up milk. You know, adult stuff like maintaining a home and family. A lawyer turned to her and just said, "You're dodging a bullet here. Someday you'll be glad he left." Turned out he was cheating on her. My mom made a very good life for herself. At 71 years old, she can afford a house cleaning service and pays someone to maintain her lawn. Calm as a bee. Row. So back in the pre-iPhone era, there was a newly married couple in my apartment building. Maybe 3-4 months in, I come home and hear them fighting about what the exact time is. Like one was saying it's 8:15 and the other was like, no, it's 8:13. So the next day the guy just walked out and I never saw him again. Later I found out they got divorced over some silly fight. Silly. The clock reads 8:13. That 2 minutes is the difference of getting a coffee before work or not. Not a lawyer, but my own personal experience. I was married for 11 years and my ex-husband wanted the divorce. He said, "I don't want to lower my standards for you." He didn't want to do anything legal, so I would be forced to stay at home and continue to do things normally. He just wanted to see other women and still have a stay-at-home mom. I had to file for divorce and he fought everything because he didn't want to pay up. He wanted the divorce, and even though I was filing for it, he didn't want to give up what he was ordered to give. He wanted me to agree that I didn't have any rights to the assets and money because I was a SMOM for 6 years. It's been about 1.5 years. Now I am in school full-time, work 2 jobs, and a single mom. Yet somehow life is easier without him here. He gave me a blessing I didn't even know I wanted. Sounds like my parents' divorce, except my father was gay, but he still wanted a SAHW for show and to do all his errands and cooking and cleaning and childcare for him. When they finally divorced because she was over it, he was greedy and tried to cheat her out of her fair share. I know this isn't the reason for the divorce, Sorry, but it made me wonder what precipitated the divorce since it was so paranoid. My sister worked for a divorce attorney, and she had to field a couple of phone calls from a guy in the midst of a messy divorce. He insisted that his ex was putting rocks on his lawn to mess with the lawnmower, and he was trying to somehow add that to the divorce proceedings. When I was younger, my parents dumped rocks on the lawn to kill the grass. It didn't work. I was expected to mow the lawn. I'm not a divorce attorney, but my former subordinate got divorced over Pokemon cards. At one point during the separation, she came to work to accuse him of stealing some of her heirs. It got near physical and we had to have security forces remove the spouse so we could get back to work. They were a hot mess. Been married for 4 years. Finally had the big talk with one another. You know, the one where we realize it is forbidden to combine our card collections. Not a divorce attorney or anything, but when I was kid, a 15-year-old girl wanted to get married to a 20-year-old guy. Because of her age, she needed her parents. So she begged and pleaded with her parents, who eventually allowed it for when she turned 16. But the guy divorced her after 4 years because she refused to have sex or even kiss, like it never occurred to her sex was involved. I suppose this is more of a reflection of the sex education she received. Wonder why the parents just didn't file a restraining order against him. A guy I used to work with said his wife divorced him because she claimed God spoke to her and told her he wanted her to move the French Riviera to be wined and dined by wealthy men. Because apparently God encourages casual hookups and wealthy men in the Riviera are lining up to sleep with 40-something mothers of 4. Not a divorce or a lawyer, but my ex years ago left me because I wanted chickens in the front yard. The conversation was something along the lines of how our futures just didn't line up. Turns out he was cheating. But you know, blame it on the dang free-range hens. It became a cherished phrase almost immediately. I'm not a divorce attorney, but I once worked with this dude that was like 19 years old. Seemed a bit young to be married. Then he said she was his second wife. He said he divorced his first wife because she kept grinding the gears in his car. Maybe the most reasonable divorce ever. My grandmother was stepping down into their fishing boat. My grandfather was already in the boat. He was holding the pier to stabilize the boat. A rogue wave came, pushed the boat violently away from the pier, and grandma nearly fell into the water. She accused him of intentionally trying to embarrass her. They barely spoke for 3 months. My grandfather refused to divorce because we're Catholic, but offered to live apart. I was about 10 years old, living with them during this time. Talk about a crash course in small talk. In Italy, apparently you can save on taxes when buying first house for your own living. If you married, it counts as one for the couple. Some people are getting divorced when buying another house to save on taxes again. If it was true, it wouldn't be a stupid reason if you could save thousands on taxes this way. I was cohabitating with and engaged to a guy, and we broke up after a week-long beach house vacation with my family because I beat him in front of everyone else playing Scrabble. He was a doctor with a huge ego and said that I was supposed to let him win to make him look good. After a week of the silent treatment, when we got home, he moved out. That's okay. He was a gambling addict as well, and that was bothering me. So I was sort of pushing his buttons, I think. He wasn't as angry when I confronted him about his gambling problem. So it's funny to me that the last straw was Scrabble. I knew a couple who married super early and divorced so he could join the Naval Academy. Apparently you can't enter if you're married. They stayed together and remarried after he graduated. This seems like one of the least stupid reasons for a divorce. Good on them for having such a strong and understanding relationship, and thank you for sharing such an interesting tale. The wife got tired of being married to a transplant surgeon and wanted to be an SMH. And yes, it turns out she had mental problems. Surgeon in residency here, neuro, but still. Surgeon lifestyle is really prone to divorce. You either marry somebody who's really invested in your career or you out of luck. Dealing with somebody so absent is not easy. An elderly friend of mine divorced his wife so she would qualify for Medicaid and could afford her treatment for a terminal illness. They'd been married 40 years and he had strong religious values about the sanctity of marriage. The state caseworker even visited the house to make sure he wasn't living there. In her last difficult days, our stupid greedy medical system was forcing them apart. He died broken-hearted and penniless not long after she passed. Every dime he had worked his lifetime to save either went to her medical bills or the unnecessary expense of keeping two households to get health insurance. Some people in the US choose never to get married for similar reasons. They'd lose their health insurance or their disability payments would be reduced. Stupid that it had to happen, but technically a good reason. My mom, who worked for our state's welfare agency for 35 years, convinced her brother and sister-in-law to get divorced. They were both my mom's best friends. My mom and her bro were Irish twins, and my aunt and uncle were in love until the day my uncle died. But my uncle worked in construction and had no savings, and so, when he got sick, he and my unemployed aunt had no income. This was my aunt's second marriage, and her first husband, a teacher, never remarried and eventually passed away. In my state, even if you divorce your spouse, you can take their social security when they die. If 1, you have none, and 2, there are no other legitimate claims. She was a stay-at-home parent and never earned income, so she had no social security, and my uncle put almost nothing into the fund, so his monthly checks were pitiful. So, they divorced. She petitioned for her first husband's SS, got it, and then they got remarried. To this day, even though my uncle is now deceased, we are forbidden from mentioning to her kids that her and my uncle were divorced for a few months. How about the most stupid reason not to divorce? A good buddy of mine married a woman who almost immediately after the wedding developed back problems. Back problems that required her to quit her job as a florist. For the last, no kidding, almost 28 years, he's lived alone in a studio apartment so she can live in a 4-bedroom house. The reason he refuses to divorce her is because of her medical condition and his job. Cop gives her golden level coverage. He also mumbles stuff about their 2 kids, but they're college bound now. He also forced himself to do the last 10 years he's retiring from his department is spring at 30 years, because at 30 years, his contract gives him and his spouse 100% medical coverage for life. He hates his life. I hate it. And her. For him. Bonus. Her boyfriend, who makes some nice bucks, lives with her in the house my buddy is paying for. That is so sad. What a nightmare for him. I really hope he finds some happiness. A couple in Australia threatened to divorce if gay marriage became legal. But surprise surprise, when it eventually became legal they didn't go through with it. They clearly had no idea what they were talking about too. They wanted to simply end their legal marriage, but to get divorce in Australia you have to separate for 6 months, live at different addresses, etc. I know a couple that wanted a divorce after 35 years because one of them were not happy with who their son was dating. People, man. Proof that even time can't heal stupidity. A friend is dating someone with divorced parents for a similar reason. The mum would lay down ridiculously high standards for their kids' partners and was driving the kids away. The dad wanted a good relationship with his kids so left her. I don't think it's a particularly stupid reason for divorce, tbh. If the reason told was stupid, most likely happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back and there were more serious underlying issues. I think you underestimate the ingenuity of stupid. Not a lawyer, but my dad's friend got divorced because they couldn't agree on what kind of house to buy. He wanted one with an apartment so they can have extra income, and she didn't want some stranger living in her house, so they split up over it. I don't think that's a stupid reason. It's a big enough disagreement that inability to work things out and see the other person's side doesn't bode well. The couple had a 7-year-old child and the mom was some crazy anti-vax crazy vegan. The dad gave the child a 6-piece McDonald's chicken nugget for his birthday and the mom went insane. She wanted full custody over the kid but didn't get it, thankfully. Weird Al Yankovic got divorced when his wife joined the Columbia Record Club. He couldn't handle that kind of commitment. That's just the way things go. share lasted just a bit over a week with Greg Allman before she filed for divorce. Eventually reconciled, but in the end they divorced. She filed because of his drug addiction. Something she should have had insight about if she had taken the time to actually get to know who he was before making the decision to marry. Instead she married him after just over 3 days of being divorced to Sonny Bono. Imagine that. Rich people led different lives. Not a lawyer, and indirectly the cause. My friend and I were competitive and always tried to mess with each other while competing. One time, while we were drinking, I don't remember what we were doing, but I said to him, "I fricked your sister." His sister's husband heard me say that and confronted her about it. This led to a huge argument and eventually their divorce. The guy was in butthole and she is significantly happier now without him. My friend's parents got divorced because his mother thought his father had superpowers and was a superhero but didn't want to help the world. Not a lawyer, but my uncle once got a marriage annulled because she got mad at him for getting a sunburn on the honeymoon. Dude's probably 98% Irish with the pastiest skin you've ever seen and she expected him to not get a sunburn? Not an attorney, and not a reason, but still a stupid thing involving a divorce. When I was volunteering at an animal shelter, there was one dog who was there simply because his owners got divorced and couldn't agree on who should get the dog. So they abandoned him in the, thankfully no kill, shelter instead. Poor dog was so big, he barely fit in the small kennel. His bedding was just blankets on the floor because he was too big for the usual dog cot's beds. If he stood with his back to the wall, his front almost reached the kennel's gate. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I hope he found a forever home with nice humans and a lot of space. Not a lawyer here, but the stories I've seen of people being forced to consider divorce to afford medical bills even though they still love each other are pretty dang stupid in a very different way than you were thinking when you wrote this question, I think. Not a divorce lawyer, or practitioner of law defense of any kind, but boy have I got a story to share. My cousin. Well, she's got a problem in that she can't seem to be happy being single and has an intense desire for that fairy tale happily married life. A few years back,